20 years of wrong numbers turned out to be my terrible manager's darkest secret. I still remember the exact model, Sony Ericsson K300i. It wasn't just a phone to me back then. It was a symbol of independence. The year was 2004, and mobile phones had just started to become accessible in my country. I had just finished high school, and like many others, I was stepping into a whole new world. College, commutes, and a whole lot of growing up to do. My parents had given me a bulky, secondhand Nokia to stay connected, but I had promised myself something better. Someday, I'd buy my own phone. And when I finally did, it came with a number that would haunt me for nearly 2 decades. Getting that Sony Ericsson felt like winning a personal war. I'd earned it, not through allowance or gifts, but through academic excellence. In high school, I'd won several district-level awards for academics, and one of those came with a cash prize from a nationalized bank. That money wasn't much to some, but to me, it was freedom. I used it to buy the phone and what was called a premium SIM card at the time. I thought I'd scored a great deal, except I hadn't. 3 days after activating the number, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. The voice on the other end was never someone I knew. "Is this Bitsah?" they'd ask, sounding either confused or furious. The first few calls were from what I assumed were friends or acquaintances, but then came the banks, loan agencies, even collection companies, all looking for one man, Bitsah. Apparently this premium number hadn't been so premium after all. It had been recycled, and the previous owner had left behind a digital trail that I was now walking straight into. I didn't know it yet, but that trail was booby-trapped. At first I tried to be polite. "Sorry, wrong number." But the calls didn't stop. They only got more aggressive. Back then, phones didn't come with built-in call blocking. If you wanted to block a number, you needed a fancy app or a phone that supported it, which mine didn't. So I started writing them down, manually. Every time I got a call from a harasser, I logged the number into a little notebook. That notebook became one of my most used college supplies. Still, I wasn't going to let go of my number. I had already memorized it, shared it, linked it to everything. My sense of ownership kicked in hard. This was my number now. And I was going to out-stubborn the ghosts of its past. So I kept rejecting and logging calls, trying to outpace the legacy of some guy named Bitsah. Little did I know, I would meet him years later, and he would make my life a living hell long before I found out who he really was. By the time I graduated college in 2009, I had learned 2 things: patience and how to dodge phone calls like a pro. I'd been receiving calls for Bitsah for 5 years at that point, and if you think it got better, think again. It got worse. Each time I changed phones, and there were quite a few over the years, I'd lose my block list. That meant starting from scratch, re-logging the same numbers, and bracing for another round of angry creditors and scammy messages. Every time my phone rang and the number wasn't saved, I hesitated. Would it be a friend? Or would it be another stranger screaming at me about money I didn't owe? It became so routine that I could tell who was calling about what just by their tone. Debt collectors always came in hot. No introductions, just threats. Bank reps were slightly more polite, trying to confirm some details. And then there were the mysterious silent calls. Those always creeped me out the most. But life went on. And in 2010, I landed my first real job in a mid-sized tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. And for a fresh grad, that was enough. I was thrown into a project that already had a bad reputation. Long hours, tight deadlines, and worse, a project manager named Bits. At the time, I didn't think anything of the name. Bits seemed like a techie nickname. Maybe a short form, or even an alias. He was just another boss to survive under. At least, that's what I told myself. But I learned quickly that Bits was no ordinary manager. He was the corporate version of a tyrant. From the moment you stepped into the office, you were under siege. Emails flooded in from him like a storm, all marked urgent. He micromanaged everything. He didn't trust anyone to do their jobs, but was the first to take credit when something went right. On the flip side, when things went wrong, he'd throw you under the bus so fast your inbox wouldn't even have time to catch up. Lunch breaks? Gone. He'd schedule meetings right in the middle of them. Weekends? Optional. If you didn't value your job, and don't even think about leaving on time. Team dedication, he'd call it. But what he really meant was my control over your life. It didn't take long before everyone dreaded working with him. He ran the project like a cult leader with a god complex. Everything had to go through him. Every decision, every line of code, every file submitted. And yet nobody knew much about him personally. He kept that side tightly guarded, except for me. I had a weird feeling every time I heard someone say his name. Bits. It stuck in my brain like a splinter. I couldn't shake the coincidence. After all, I'd been haunted by calls for Bitsah for years. It seemed too bizarre to be unrelated. Still, I didn't act on the suspicion. Not yet. I was too busy trying not to get fired or mentally crushed under his reign of terror. But my gut wouldn't shut up. Something about this guy just felt familiar. And that unease was about to crack wide open when the company made a small internal upgrade. That upgrade changed everything. In 2012, something small happened at our company that would change everything for me. The company merged with a larger parent firm. There weren't any major layoffs or team shuffles, So at first, it seemed like business as usual. But there was one upgrade that came along quietly: Microsoft Outlook. We were finally given access to a proper organizational chart. No more emailing project.manager42acompany.com and guessing who they reported to. With a few clicks, you could see your manager, their manager, and so on up the chain. It was like someone had turned on the lights in a house we'd been stumbling around in for years. Out of curiosity, and maybe a little spite, I searched for Bits. And there he was. The man who had tormented so many of us, glaring from his corporate headshot like he owned the company. But this time, his full name was listed. Bitsah. I swear my breath caught in my throat. My eyes didn't move for a solid 10 seconds. It wasn't just the first name that matched. It was the same area code from the number, the same general age bracket, the same exact spelling. That nagging feeling I'd buried for years suddenly had a face. And that face was my boss. My abusive, control-freak boss who'd made my life hell was the same man whose unpaid debts had been hijacking my phone for nearly a decade. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Surely this had to be a coincidence. Bitsah was a somewhat common name where I grew up. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just a fluke. But it didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like fate. Still, I needed confirmation. So I reached out to someone who'd know, the only person I trusted to help me without turning this into office gossip: my old high school mentor. This man had been coaching and mentoring students in our area for decades. If anyone had kept tabs on the local troublemakers, it would be him. I met up with him over a weekend coffee and brought up the name Bitsah. I didn't even have to finish the sentence. He gave me a look, half annoyance, half amusement, and said, "Oh yeah, I remember that guy. Big trouble. Always cutting corners, always lying about something. I think his family moved out of the area eventually." Why are you asking? That was all the confirmation I needed. It was like someone hit rewind on every stressful memory from the last decade. Every cursed call, every blocked number, every voicemail demanding payment, and every soul-crushing workday under Bits. My life hadn't just been randomly inconvenienced. It had been haunted by this guy from two directions, completely unknowingly, until fate finally brought our paths together. And it was in that moment, sitting across from my old mentor, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, that the gears in my head started turning. If this man had messed with me by accident for almost a decade, I wondered what would happen if I messed with him back on purpose. The number he once used to dodge responsibilities, that number now belonged to someone who had nothing left to lose. And a whole lot of time. It didn't take long to formulate my plan. Honestly, I didn't even think of it as revenge at first. It was more like poetic justice. For years, this man had used that phone number to dodge responsibility, ignore debt collectors, and vanish from the radar. And I, unknowingly, had been shielding him the entire time, dodging calls, blocking numbers, deflecting messages that weren't meant for me. But now that I knew exactly who he was, where he worked, and what his real name was, that phone number suddenly felt like a loaded weapon I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all along. The first thing I did was simple. I unblocked everyone. Every single number I had saved in my little notebook. Every call I'd shut out over the years, I reversed it all. I opened the floodgates. Within 48 hours, my phone was a war zone. 15 to 18 calls a day, sometimes more. Banks, collection agencies, even private individuals. I started picking up everyone, no matter how obscure the number looked. But I didn't hang up anymore. I answered politely, calmly, and with a tone that implied I wanted to help. "Hi, yes. You're looking for Mr. Bitsah, correct?" Pause. "Oh, I'm sorry. He no longer uses this number, but I can help you update your records." That was the key. These people weren't expecting cooperation. They were expecting hostility, avoidance, excuses. But I gave them none of that. I gave them leads, and this is where I probably became the villain of someone's story, because I didn't just hand out one number. I gave them his current corporate number. I gave them his direct line at the office. I even gave some of them his manager's number, just in case he tries to dodge. "You again." Some of the debt collectors asked questions. "How do you know him? Are you related?" And my answer was always the same. "I used to work with him. Just want to do the right thing." And honestly, it didn't even feel like a lie. He had worked with me. He had ruined years of my mental health. This was me finally taking that power back, one call at a time. And the best part? These weren't just recent debts. Some of these collectors had been trying to track him down for years. Apparently, Bitsah had been taking loans not just in his own name, but in the names of his family members, his wife, his parents, even distant relatives. He was running some kind of long-term scam, and nobody had been able to pin him down because his contact details always hit a dead end. That dead end was me. Until now. Once the calls started pouring into his office, it didn't take long for things to unravel. I wasn't in the room, of course, but gossip spreads fast when a manager's phone won't stop ringing. Apparently, people thought he was in debt. Then they thought maybe someone was impersonating him. Then it became clear that no, these debts were real. And someone had just handed his entire financial skeleton closet to the one place he couldn't control, his workplace. He'd built a throne out of intimidation and fear. But now, The calls he thought he'd buried were crawling out of the grave, and they were coming for him. And I was just getting started. The storm didn't hit all at once, but when it did, it was relentless. I didn't have a front row seat to the chaos, but I had enough colleagues who did, and they were more than happy to keep me in the loop. When someone like Bits finally starts stumbling, everyone notices. And for someone who had spent years flexing control over every tiny task and breathing down everyone's neck, seeing cracks in his armor was practically a company holiday. First, he tried to maintain composure, brushed off the endless phone calls as spam or harassment, claimed someone must have sold his info to scammers. He even put out a company-wide email reminding employees to stay vigilant and not share internal contact details. That email aged like milk because the calls didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. You see, the collectors weren't your average polite bank reps anymore. These were the big guns, the hired sharks who buy debt in bulk and make it their full-time job to shake people down. And they were hungry. Some of them started calling multiple times a day. Others began calling his manager, the one I'd helpfully given as a backup contact. I figured if he wanted to micromanage everyone's workday, it was only fair he couldn't manage his own. I had no idea if his boss knew the full story yet, but I imagined the words $200,000 in unpaid loans started to raise some eyebrows. Because yes, that was the total. Over $200,000, converted to USD. In our country, that's an unfathomable amount, enough to destroy families. And he hadn't just taken out those loans in his own name. He'd burned his wife's credit, his parents, even a couple of uncles and cousins, anyone who ever trusted him enough to co-sign or hand over. A signature had been left holding a flaming bag of debt, and all those collectors had been looking for one thing, a live contact. Thanks to me, they finally had one. Some of my friends from other teams started whispering about him. He was seen shouting on phone calls, locking himself in conference rooms, avoiding eye contact. The guy who once barked orders across the floor now walked around like a ghost, jumpy, paranoid, constantly checking his phone like it might bite him. Then one day, the strangest thing happened. He went quiet. No mass emails. No pop-up meetings. No 10 p.m. Slack messages demanding revisions ASAP. Just silence. The very next week, rumors swirled. He was on leave. No one knew why. Then HR held a closed-door meeting. A few days later, his name disappeared from the org chart. Just like that. The man who had ruled our lives like a dictator for years had vanished. Was he fired? Was he forced to resign? Did he quit under pressure? No one really knew. But everyone knew it wasn't voluntary. And me? I didn't need to. No, I'd already gotten what I wanted. Not just revenge. Closure. For years, I carried the weight of someone else's mess. His choices polluted my life in ways he never knew. But in the end, that number, the one he discarded like trash, became the very thing that brought him down. And all I had to do was answer the phone. Even now, years later, I still think about it sometimes, about how a random SIM card and a name I didn't recognize ended up changing the trajectory of my entire career. What were the odds? In a country with millions of mobile users, I happened to inherit the exact number of the man who would become the single worst influence in my professional life. But the truth is, I don't regret a thing. If anything, I regret not doing it sooner. There's something weirdly satisfying about poetic justice, especially when it's so unintentional at first. I didn't go looking for revenge. I didn't set out to destroy someone's career or expose their hidden debts. I just wanted a clean phone line. I just wanted peace. And for years, I tried to take the high road, deleting, blocking, ignoring, excusing. But he didn't take the high road. Not at work. Not in life. Not with the people who trusted him. He scammed banks, destroyed his relatives' credit, and ruled his office like a petty tyrant. And for years, he got away with all of it, because the trail always ended with me. When I realized that I had been the firewall between him and the consequences he so desperately avoided, I stopped feeling bad. Why should I protect someone who'd never spared a second to protect anyone else? Letting those calls reach him wasn't just about revenge, it was about balance. For once, the system worked in my favor. And yes, some might say what I did was vindictive, that maybe I should have let it go, turned the other cheek. But I've learned that sometimes turning the other cheek just gives a bully another target. Sometimes the only way to stop someone from hurting others is to stop shielding them from the fallout of their own actions. I don't know where Bitsah is today. I don't care. All I know is the calls stopped, and so did his reign of terror.
You've heard the case. While you consider your verdict, the court calls the next case to order.
Stepdad betrayed my mom, so we took everything from him. When my mom, a 50-year-old woman who had already survived a 25-year marriage to my manipulative biological father, finally filed for divorce, it felt like a long overdue breath of fresh air. I, 24M, had just moved back in with her to help out and get back on my feet. After everything she had been through, I was just hoping she'd find peace again. Not long after I settled in, she introduced us to her new boyfriend, Chris, a 45-year-old man with a checkered past. He had been an inmate at the county jail where my mom worked as a correctional officer. He was in for a DUI, which, in hindsight, should have been the first red flag. But after what my mom had endured in her marriage, I didn't want to judge. She seemed happy for the first time in years, and that was enough for me. Chris was rough, around the edges, but he made an effort, at least at first. My 30-year-old sister and 23-year-old brother moved in with us too. We were a full house, but for a while things felt surprisingly okay. Chris and I even bonded over video games. There were still awkward moments, like the fact that he never really addressed his past or future seriously, but we let it slide. We wanted to believe that Mom had finally found someone decent. Unfortunately, the illusion didn't last. Things started to unravel in 2017. Chris, with that DUI still hanging over his record, had to check in regularly at the courthouse as part of his probation. One day he left for his appointment like usual, but never came back. Hours passed. No texts, no calls. We started to worry something had happened. Then finally the phone rang. It was Chris, calling from Texas. Apparently the FBI had been waiting for him. Turns out Chris's family down in Texas was neck-deep in gang activity and drug trafficking. And thanks to one unlucky moment, when Chris had been in a car during a drug handoff, he was now tied to their crimes. His way out? Flip on his family. He made a deal to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence and was released temporarily before the trial. My mom was devastated. She had believed in him, put her reputation on the line for him, and now she was stuck trying to make sense of this chaos. But somehow, during all those emotional phone calls over the next year, they patched things up. They even started planning a wedding for when he got out. The owner of the DQ where he used to work even promised to give him his manager job back. It seemed like we were heading into a new chapter. But as soon as Chris came back, the cracks started to show again. The moment Chris returned, the drinking started, and not just the casual kind. We're talking half a 24-pack of beer a day. It was obvious that Chris, the same 45-year-old man who had already done time for a DUI, hadn't learned a damn thing. And when he drank, he wasn't just loud, he was cruel. The kind of drunk who picked fights over nothing and lashed out with words that cut deep. While he never laid a hand on my mom, his verbal abuse left scars that didn't fade easily. But Mom, still holding on to the hope that things might work out, kept making excuses for him. She told us the stress of work, the upcoming trial, and everything from his past was weighing him down. She wanted to believe that the man she defended through all that legal hell could still be saved. Years passed like that. Tension, fights, apologies that meant nothing. Until one night he came home completely wasted, stumbling through the door like nothing was wrong. That was the final straw. My mom, tired, hurt, and finally done, confronted him right there. When she asked if he had been drinking and he didn't even bother denying it, she told him to get out. No yelling, no drama, just firm, cold, and final. He left to stay with a friend. The next morning, Mom asked us to help pack up a few of his essentials, clothes, toiletries, whatever he'd need, so he wouldn't have to set foot in the house again until he was sober. We thought we were just helping her close a painful chapter. We had no idea what bomb was about to drop next. As we were packing up Chris's stuff, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw someone I hadn't expected. Betty, a 25-year-old woman who had gone to high school with me and now worked with Chris. She looked nervous, like she was about to confess to a crime. My mom sat down across from her and Betty got right to it. She made Mom promise not to say where the information came from, and then she dropped a bombshell. Chris had been cheating, not just emotionally. He'd been having sex with another woman, Darla, a woman in her early 40s, in and around the DQ where he worked. Betty had walked in on them more than once. When she threatened to say something, Chris told her he'd fire her if she ever opened her mouth. He was the store manager, after all. And the worst part? Darla was pregnant. My mom went quiet, completely still. You could almost hear the rage building under her skin. She didn't scream or cry. She just stood up, looked at us, and calmly said, "Get everything of his, everything. It's going in the alley." We didn't hesitate. Every last item Chris owned, his clothes, electronics, even his video game collection, was dumped in the alley behind our house. Legally, there were no issues. The house was rented in my mom's name only. He had no rights to it. Then she called him, confronted him, and Chris didn't even try to lie. He admitted to the affair, said he was glad Darla was pregnant because he'd finally have a child of his own, something my mom couldn't give him due to health risks from past pregnancies. He refused to apologize. She arranged for him to pick up his trash, his belongings, with a police escort. That should have been the end of the story. But we weren't done. My mom wanted to move on, to be done with Chris and erase him from her life. But my 30-year-old sister, 23-year-old brother, and I, we weren't so forgiving. He didn't just cheat. He humiliated her. He threatened her peace. And we weren't about to let that slide. First stop? His workplace. DQ franchises are often independently owned, and the one Chris managed was no exception. We knew the owner. He operated several stores in the area and had always been decent to our family. We gave him the full story. Chris was abusing his position as manager, allowing sexual acts to take place on the premises and threatening coworkers to keep quiet. The owner didn't even blink. Chris was fired, banned from every location the owner controlled. And in a poetic twist, Betty, the one who told us the truth, got promoted and now runs that branch like a pro. But Chris didn't stay unemployed for long. We heard he had moved in with Darla in a town an hour away and had started working at another DQ there. So we made a second call. This time, it wasn't as easy. There weren't any recorded infractions at the new store, so they couldn't just fire him on hearsay. But we were persistent. We warned them, followed up, and after a while, whether from pressure or Chris screwing up again, he lost that job too. We thought that might finally be the end of it. Then he started driving around our neighborhood. Same car, same shady behavior. Watching the house, circling. It was creepy as hell. But here's the kicker. He didn't even have a license. Remember that DUI? He was still on probation. Technically, he wasn't allowed to drive at all. But there he was, behind the wheel of Darla's car, stalking our street like we wouldn't notice. We called the police, reported the car, told them who he was and what he was doing, gave them everything they needed to pull him over. A few weeks later, we got the call. Chris had been caught, driving drunk with no license. Again. But that wasn't the only thing they found. The police had enough reason to dig deeper after the DUI arrest, and when they searched the house Chris was staying in with Darla, they found something that sealed his fate. Guns. Several of them. Chris, as a convicted felon, wasn't even allowed to be near firearms, let alone living in a home that had them. That violation alone meant more jail time. But add that to driving under the influence, driving without a license and probation violation, and suddenly Chris was headed straight back to jail. And the timing? Couldn't have been better. Just as he finished serving time locally, the clock ran out on his freedom deal in Texas. Remember the plea agreement that let him walk free while waiting to testify against his gang-affiliated family? Well, it was time to pay the rest of that sentence. They shipped him back to Texas to finish what he owed. Meanwhile, Darla gave birth to his child. While Chris rotted in a prison cell, Darla apparently had her own moment of clarity. Maybe she saw the same controlling, manipulative side of him that we all knew too well. Because shortly after the baby was born, she cut all ties with him. That should have been rock bottom for Chris. But instead of reflecting on what he did, he started sending letters, tons of them. Pages and pages of apologies, rants, pity stories, all addressed to my mom. Some lines begged her to take him back. Others screamed that none of this was his fault. And then, right after those lines, he'd claim to love her still. It was pathetic. My mom never even opened most of them. She'd grab the stack from the mailbox, walk straight to the backyard fire pit, and burn them. Chris had become nothing more than ashes in our past. After everything, the betrayal, the lies, the arrests, we finally moved on. My mom, still, the strongest 50-year-old woman I've ever known, packed up her life and relocated out of state. She bought a new home, one we've been slowly renovating together. I still live with her, not because I have to, but because I want to help her build something peaceful, something that's hers alone. My brother found a great job and moved out. My sister got engaged and finally seems genuinely happy. We all started new chapters, away from the damage Chris had left behind. As for Chris, he eventually got out of prison. Last we heard, he was living in Kansas, broke, bitter, and fighting tooth and nail to avoid paying child support, which Darla rightfully sued him for. No job, no respect, no family, just letters that never got read and bridges he burned on. His own. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. We didn't ruin his life. He did that all by himself. All we did was make sure the fallout caught up to him, and that my mom never had to pay the price for someone else's mistakes again.
The case has been heard. The stories have been told. Now it's your turn to judge. Leave your verdict in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. The Court of Stories is always in session.